I was literally just a couple of months away from getting my PhD in physics when I saw, believe it or not, an ad in the Stanford student newspaper that had been put in the newspaper by NASA saying that they were accepting applications for astronaut. And the moment I saw that, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. Not that I wanted to leave physics. I loved it, but I wanted to apply to the astronaut corps and see whether NASA would take me and see whether I could have the opportunity to go on that adventure. They had never taken a woman. One of the reasons that they were putting ads in student newspapers was that, first of all, they hadn't at that time taken any astronauts in about 10 years. So they needed to get the word out, but more importantly, it was the first time they were planning to bring women into the astronaut corps. And they knew that unless they put announcements in places that qualified women would see them, they would get just the usual suspects of white male military test pilots applying to the program. So this was the first time that they were bringing in women. I had never flown anything, not a thing. I had flown in very large airplanes, but I'd never flown anything. But NASA was looking for, the astronaut corps at that time was still primarily test pilots, but they had some scientists in the corps, and they had made it clear that with the space shuttle program, they actually needed an astronaut corps that was more than 50% scientists and engineers, less than 50% test pilots. So they made it very, very clear that they wanted people with science and engineering backgrounds, and that the test pilot or even a pilot background was not required. They'd teach us everything we needed to know about that. I was surprised to be chosen. I was fairly certain that I would make it a reasonably long way in the selection process because I was pretty well qualified to apply. I was going to have a PhD by the time the selection process was over. I had a good athletic background, which NASA, they don't necessarily look for an athletic background, but they look for a variety of different backgrounds that show that you've got a variety of interests and particularly show that you can collaborate well with people, work as part of a team, communicate with people. So I knew that I had a reasonable chance to go a reasonable distance in the selection process, but I didn't think for a minute that I was going to be selected. It was tougher for a woman, but the reason was really the surrounding culture at the time. The culture at NASA, at the Johnson Space Center, and also the culture in the country. It wasn't more difficult, interestingly, within the astronaut office itself. The women and men, first of all, the group of 35 of us who were selected included 6 women, so not just 1, but 6, a little bit of security in numbers. And the 29 men who were selected as part of that group were actually accustomed to working with women. One had a PhD thesis advisor who was a female physics professor. So they were not unaccustomed to the concept. So we had a peer group that was very supportive and didn't think that it was that unusual. However, our whole group was set into this culture where it was very unusual. Out of roughly 4,000 technical employees at the Johnson Space Center, 4,000 or so scientists and engineers, I think there were only 4 women. So that gives you a sense of how male the culture was. When we arrived, we doubled, more than doubled the number of women with PhDs at the center. I had a lot of friends who also applied to the astronaut program, so they understood completely why I wanted to do it. My parents were, at least the impression they gave me was that they were very, very supportive and very, very excited. And I'm positive my father was. I'm less positive about my mother, but I think my father, actually both of them were very excited and very supportive. It's something that was just deep inside me, and there's really no other way to describe it, because it's something that the moment I saw the opportunity, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So I can't explain why I wanted to do it. It's just, it's just something that was part of me. It was hard to become an astronaut. It was hard to make it through the selection process, and the training itself was was very difficult. Not anywhere near as much physical training as people imagine, but a lot of mental training, a lot of learning. You have to learn everything there is to know about the space shuttle and everything you're going to be doing, and everything you need to know if something goes wrong. And then once you've learned it all, you have to practice until everything is second nature. So it's a very, very difficult training, and it takes years. I didn't have any doubts that that was what I wanted to be doing, and I didn't have any doubts that that I would be able to do it. I was, up until that point, up until I joined the Astronaut Corps, you could say I was a professional student. I mean, I'd made it through high school, undergraduate, graduate school, to a PhD, so I knew how to learn things. I knew how to study. I knew how to concentrate and to dedicate myself to learning one particular area. And that's what I was doing again. So I was fairly confident and comfortable, actually, in the environment. We all knew that the six of us were the first 6 women to enter the Astronaut Corps. We were very well aware of that. We realized that this was a significant breakthrough, and that to some extent we were pioneers and trailblazers. But I have to say that I don't think I appreciated how much of a trailblazer I was for women, and how much women would look up to me as a role model in the things that I had done until after my first flight, after I landed. Partly because while I was in training, I was pretty well insulated by NASA. They wanted me in training. They wanted me to learn what I was supposed to learn. They didn't want me out talking to reporters and the press and the public. So I was not unaware. I mean, I read newspapers, I watched television, but I wasn't face-to-face with women until I came back from my flight. And then it hit home pretty hard how important it was to an awful lot of women in the country. I think that I had a lot of the qualities that they were looking for in any astronaut that they select. An understanding of the importance of teamwork, an ability to learn things, an ability to recognize a role as a member of a team, sort of an ability to do things carefully, go through a checklist, make sure that you've done in science the experiment correctly, in space gone through the experiment or the checklist correctly. I have no idea why they chose me among the 6 of us to be the first American woman to get a chance to go into space. That's one of the things that NASA does very well, is keep its secrets on how it selects crews. None of us know why we were selected for any given crew. So I know that the commander of the flight, Bob Crippen, had some input into that decision, but he didn't get to decide, and I have no idea how that decision was made. I'd love to know. I was ecstatic. I was thrilled. And my first reaction was probably identical to the reaction of the other 4 members of the crew who were told that same day. We just could not believe that we got our chance to go into space. We were the first 4 from our astronaut class to get to go. And so we'd been in training for 4 years at that time, building up to this point, and the moment that we were told, it was, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I get a chance to do this. And it was only after that, not long after that, but after that, that I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to be the first woman to get to go up representing this country. There's a huge amount of pressure on every astronaut because, when you get right down to it, the experiments that are conducted on a space flight, or the satellites that are carried up, the work that's to be done is important and expensive work. And you're up there for a week or 2 on a space shuttle flight. the country has invested a lot of money in you and your training and the space shuttle and everything that's in it. And you have to do things correctly. You know, you can't make a mistake during that week or two that you're in space. You know, anything from making a mistake on an experiment that would ruin someone's, some scientist on Earth's experiment career, potentially, to, you know, doing something wrong with a satellite that a country was depending on for its communications, to making some mistake that could actually cost you and the crew either a mission or your lives. So there's a lot of pressure that's put on every astronaut to just make sure that he or she understands exactly what to do, exactly when to do it, and is trained and prepared to carry it out. The view of Earth is absolutely spectacular, you know, and the feeling of looking back and seeing your planet as a planet is just an amazing feeling. It's a totally different perspective, and it makes you appreciate actually how fragile our existence is. You know, you can look at Earth's horizon and see this really, really thin royal blue line right along the horizon. And at first you don't really quite internalize what that is, and then you realize that it's Earth's atmosphere and that that's all there is of it. And it's about as thick as the fuzz on a tennis ball. And it's everything that separates us from the vacuum of space. You know, if we didn't have that atmosphere, we wouldn't be here. And if we do anything to destroy that atmosphere, we won't be here. You know, so it really puts the planet in perspective. Four of the astronauts who were killed in the Challenger explosion were part of our group of 35 astronauts, part of that astronaut class. So these were people that at that time I'd known for 8 years. I'd worked with them every day. I'd you know, gone to dinner at their houses. I knew their families. So they were very, very close friends. My then husband had been on the flight before the Challenger accident, and I was scheduled to go about 2 months after the Challenger accident. So it was, you know, it hit me very, very personally, just to lose friends and to think about, you know, what might have been. And of course, it was a huge blow professionally because, you know, I think that astronauts understand very well what the risks are of flying in space. But we all also have a real trust and faith in NASA and the process that it goes through to minimize those risks to the extent possible. And as the investigation unfolded, it became very clear that that system had broken down, and that system that we trusted to, you know, track down any flaw or any piece of bad test data really had failed. One of the things that I realized while I was in the astronaut corps, and after I'd been on my second flight, was really how much I did love science and loved physics. And I had known, even when I went into the astronaut corps, that I would leave someday. NASA's model is astronauts leave after about 7 years and then go on with their lives. That's how they model their recruiting efforts. I had planned to go back into physics and to become a physicist. And after 5 or 6 years in the astronaut corps, I realized that was important to me. And I had actually planned to leave NASA after my third flight, which I never had an opportunity to take because of the Challenger accident. But I had planned to go back into academia, into physics research and physics teaching. So it was almost as if that phase of my life had come to a conclusion, and I was ready to move on at that time. Well, my childhood was probably the typical childhood for a kid growing up in Southern California in the 50s and early 60s. You know, I loved being outside. I loved being active. I loved swimming. I loved playing tennis. I loved playing baseball in the street. As it turns out, I also liked science and math. And I was probably fortunate in that both of my parents really valued education, and they didn't have any sort of preconception on what sort of field I should go into. So they made sure that I spent plenty of time studying, but also trying to make it fun and trying to make it entertaining and trying to make me appreciate that it was a good way to get ahead in the world. There were a lot of preconceptions back then. I think that whether in sports or whether in career choice, there were definitely preconceptions that girls didn't participate in sports other than swimming and tennis and golf. They probably didn't like them, or they'd probably get hurt playing them or something. And that women didn't go on to become lawyers or doctors, much less scientists or engineers. And my parents, I think, were unusual in that they didn't hold those preconceptions. I liked some classes, I didn't like others. I looked forward to getting out of school every day and getting onto the playground or getting home to play with my friends. But I didn't really mind going to school as much as some of my classmates did, and as much as a lot of kids do. History and English were difficult for me. Science and math were easy. History and English were difficult for me. I was a quiet kid when I was growing up, and so I didn't like to talk in class. I didn't like to be called on in class. So I think that my most stressful moments were probably sitting in class huddled down, hoping that the teacher didn't notice me and call on me. Whether I knew the answer or not, that was irrelevant. I have no idea whether it's just part of my nature. I'm an introvert by nature, or whether it was something to do with the times growing up. Who knows? But it was definitely true while I was in elementary school and middle school, and even a little bit into high school. While I was growing up in the early days of the space program. And I can still remember teachers wheeling those big old black and white television sets into the classroom so that we could watch some of the early space launches and the splashdowns. And that made a real impact on me, as I think it did a lot of kids growing up at the time. I thought a lot about what it would be like to be on a rocket, what it would be like to be in space when I was 12 years old. A lot of my girlfriends were liked science as much as I did, especially at age 8, 9, 10, 11, and we were all fascinated by the space program in one way or another. But I think that most of my friends ran into some obstacle or deterrent along the way that just sent them off in different directions in their careers. It might have been a teacher, might have been a counselor, might have been a parent, might have been a peer group, and I was probably very fortunate just not to run into those deterrents while I was impressionable and growing up. The two who were most influential were high school science teachers. One taught physiology and one taught chemistry. And what was so important to me was not that they were good science teachers. They were, but I'd had plenty of other good teachers growing up. What was important to me was that they helped me build my confidence in myself, my self-esteem. And I needed that like lots of kids need it. And they basically said, look, if you were good in math in 6th grade, you're going to be good in math in 12th grade, you're going to be good in math in college. You don't get dumber as you get older. And I needed to hear that and just have that confidence in myself that yes, I was smart enough to go on to college and smart enough to go on and do whatever I was interested in college. There was that all-time classic, Danny Dunn and the Anti-Gravity Machine. I actually read a lot when I was growing up. I read all the Nancy Drew mysteries when I was young. I read, as I said, the Danny Dunn series of science books. I read comic books. I read Mad Magazine, and I also read Scientific American. I had my parents got me. My parents were not scientists and probably had no idea how to encourage a kid who was interested in science. So they decided, well, Scientific American would be a good thing to have in the house. So they subscribed to that. And I remember reading that when I was, 13, 14, 15. And I think that those are probably my strongest memories. I was a good tennis player. I really really enjoyed being outside. I really enjoyed playing sports, and started playing tennis when I was about 11, and really got hooked on it. Played in tournaments, first locally in Southern California, and then later nationally, and basically spent every summer playing pretty serious tennis. When I headed off to college, I kind of made the decision that tennis wasn't going to be the central point in my life. I went off to Swarthmore and started college at Swarthmore College. And about a year and a half into my college experience, I decided, what was I thinking? I should have been a professional tennis player, and I quit college. And that did not go over well with my parents, but I quit school, moved back to Southern California, and actually focused on tennis for about 3 months before I saw the light, and transferred to Stanford, went back to school. I had this very, very strong feeling that I had something in me that I hadn't really explored, and it was, how good a tennis player could I be? Could I be good enough to be a professional tennis player? There's no way I'm going to find this out at Swarthmore College, and if I wait until after I graduate, it will likely be too late. So I thought about it for several weeks pretty seriously, because it was mid-year when I quit college. It was after the fall semester, but I was completely committed to doing that when I packed my bags and headed home. But fortunately, I took a long, hard look at my forehand and realized that I was not going to make a fortune with that forehand. I transferred to Stanford, which was closer to home, but also had the advantage that I could play tennis while I was at Stanford, as well as, of course, being excellent academically. So I went to Stanford, started Stanford the next fall, and declared a physics major and played on the tennis team. So I was a happy student. I was a physics major actually from almost the first day that I walked in the door at Swarthmore, and I was certainly a physics major, declared a physics major when I first got to Stanford. But about midway through my junior year at Stanford, I was just had been taking so many physics and chemistry and math courses, which were all required for a physics major, that I just needed some courses, almost to regain my sanity, get a little more balance into my life. And I started taking English courses, pretty much on a whim. I had a friend who was an English major, and so I decided to go ahead and try a couple of English classes, and I really enjoyed them. It turned out that I kept taking the English classes, had a focus on Shakespearean literature, and ended up with enough units to also have a major in English. Once I went back to Stanford, and once I was pretty committed to being a physics major, I was certain that I wanted to be a scientist, a research scientist, a professor, and that physics was my field. In the years since my flight, I had the opportunity to talk to lots and lots and lots of groups, including elementary school kids, high school kids, college students, women's groups, and what I realized in doing that was that there were a lot of young girls and young women who were very, very interested in science, just like I was when I was growing up, and the number of those girls was rather large in elementary school. In fact, it seemed to be that about the same number of girls as boys showed an interest in the space program, in science, but that by the time got to high school and college, if I would go to talk to a physics class, I would see that the number of women in the class was not that much more than when I was in college. A little bit better, but not that much more. So it was really clear that the pipeline was leaking more girls than boys, all the way from elementary school through college. And I came to appreciate that the reasons are primarily societal. The girls in elementary school are as good at math and science as the boys. The test scores show that. There have now been surveys. There was one, not recent, 1996 survey of fourth graders that asked a bunch of questions, including, do you like science? And 68% of fourth grade boys said they like science, 66% of fourth grade girls say they like science. So in fourth grade, it's the same number of boys and girls. Then we start losing both boys and girls, but we lose girls disproportionately all the way through, and it starts right around fourth or fifth grade. So I decided that it was worth my time to try to have some impact on that and try to first help change the culture and make the culture realize that the girls are out there, that if we want scientists and engineers in the future, we should be cultivating the girls as much as the boys, and that we needed to be able to give girls in middle school, high school, and college the same opportunities that we give to boys. So, I've put in a lot of time creating programs for girls, particularly in middle school, to just keep them engaged and introduce them to role models, show them that whether they want to be a rocket scientist or a geochemist or a microbiologist, that there are women who are now actively involved in those careers and who love what they do. So I think it's slowly but surely having an impact. I've been a bit of a risk taker all my life, not always in the traditional way of defining risks, but it was probably, when I was growing up, it was probably risky for a young girl to decide to be a scientist. It was probably, even when I was in college, risky for a female college graduate to go on to graduate school in physics. And certainly going on to be an astronaut was taking a risk. But I think that that it is important to be willing to take that step, to kind of make that leap to do what you want to do. And that is my definition of being a risk taker. I actually measure it by personal satisfaction. I measure it by my own standards and my own goals, and whether I think that I've lived up to what I want to be doing in a particular day or a particular week or a particular year. At any one time, I have a pretty good idea of what I want to be doing in my life today and tomorrow. Not necessarily 5 years from now, but today and tomorrow I have a good idea of what I want to be doing. And it's my own sense of accomplishment, my own internal measure that I think gives me the measure of achievement. If I think that I've accomplished what I set out to accomplish, then that's achievement. The world has no shortage of problems, but I think that that one that is becoming clearer and clearer to us now is the global environment and how we're having an impact on the global environment. And I think that my perspective from space has given me perhaps a unique perspective on this problem. It's the only planet we've got. And you can see the effect of humanity when you look back at Earth from space. You can see it in a lot of different areas. You can see smog over the cities. You can see pollution in the water. Our satellites can measure differences in the atmosphere. and it's starting to accumulate to a point that we may not be able to correct the problem if we don't do something about it pretty soon. So I think that that's one of the things that concerns me most over the next several decades. I'd like to be remembered as someone who was not afraid to do what she wanted to do, and as someone who took risks along the way in order to achieve her goals.